So with the success of the FIFA E Football Manager World Cup earlier this year, I figured it was about time to take the current role scores functionality on FMDataLab and utilise it for a shiny new fantasy draft tool. Despite it looking like FM25 will not have the fantasy draft mode, I noticed quite a few of you were still asking for this feature, and well, I live to serve, and over the past few weeks I've put together this new fantasy draft tool, so hopefully some of you fantasy draft enthusiasts get some mileage out of it. The fantasy draft role scores tool on FMDataLab is built to be your secret weapon. You get detailed role scores for every player on your draft list, helping you analyse your draft picks, give you an edge over your competition, and most importantly, help avoid that dreaded post-draft regret. So at its heart, the fantasy draft tool is built on the same core foundation as the role scores tool, leveraging calculations to derive role scores from player attribute values. So if you're already familiar with the role scores tool, then diving into the fantasy draft tool should feel like second nature. It's essentially the same great functionality but tailored specifically for the fantasy draft mode. And hey, if this is your first time exploring FMDataLab, I'd highly recommend checking out my very first video. It walks through the ins and outs of how the role scores tool works and gives you a solid starting point. Trust me, it'll make this experience a whole lot smoother. While it shares its foundation with the role scores tool, the fantasy draft tool is far from a mere replica. It incorporates several fantasy draft specific enhancements to streamline and elevate the drafting process. Some of the additional features includes player selection, where you can shortlist prospective draft picks with ease. Budget management, where you can set your budget to match your FM draft budget and watch it dynamically update as players are selected, helping you keep an eye on what's left in the budget. Pre-selection matching, so if you export your player list mid-draft, the tool can match your club name to a player's drafted club. This saves you from the headache of manually reselecting players. There's a squad size tracker to keep tabs on your current squad totals and see exactly how many spots are left to fill. There's position depth view, where you can check your squad's positional depth at a glance, making sure you're not overloading in one position while neglecting the rest. And finally, there's a detailed player info, so you can dive into the finer details of your selections with insights into their attributes, positions, and best role. Altogether, these features make the fantasy draft tool an absolute must-have for fantasy draft fans, offering a more organised, insightful, and hopefully effective drafting experience. Certain features that are present in the role scores tool have been intentionally excluded from the fantasy draft tool as they're either not available or hold limited relevance within the context of FM's fantasy draft mode. These omitted features include the player role scores trajectories. This is the functionality where it provides an analysis of how a player's role score may evolve over time. It's not included in the fantasy draft tool as long-term player development and potential trajectories are not pertinent to the short-term competitive nature of the fantasy draft mode. The wage column is also not included in the table as it's not available in Fantasy Draft, and also not included in the table are the player information, media handling style, and the pros and cons columns. To get started using the Fantasy Draft tool, you'll need to download FM views with all the relevant columns to calculate role scores in the Fantasy Draft mode. You can download these Fantasy Draft views from the Downloading Fantasy Draft section in the Fantasy Draft tutorial page. Here you can click on the Download Fantasy Draft Views, and this will take you to a MediaFire page to download a zip file that contains the free relevant view files. Or you can download all FMDataLab views from the Download Views tutorial page, where you'll find the Fantasy Draft views in the Fantasy Draft directory in the extracted zip file. With the Fantasy Draft views downloaded, you can then import these views into the three separate screens in FM's Fantasy Draft mode. First, you're going to want to extract the view files from the downloaded zip file and then move them to the views directory in your Football Manager 2004 directory. If the views directory does not exist, you can simply create one. Now, I'll walk you all through how to import each of the free views into Football Manager's Fantasy Draft mode. First up, we have the pre-draft or shortlisting stage view. I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but this is the step just before the initial draft selections, is where you'll typically shortlist your potential draft before the draft pick stage. When you're on this step, you'll need to click on the view drop-down, then hover over the custom option. Then you'll click on the import view, then you'll navigate to the views directory where you've added the downloaded Fantasy Draft view files. Then select the FMDataLab draft shortlisting view file, not to be confused with the FMDataLab shortlist view file. Again, I'm not very good at naming things as I covered in the last video. Then press OK and the view file will be applied to this screen. After the shortlisting stage has been completed, you'll move on to the actual draft selection stage, and here is where you can import the remaining two views. The first of which is on the player search view. So when you're on this Find Player tab, again, go through the same steps as before, starting with clicking on the view drop down. However, this time you'll want to select the FMDataLab draft search view file. And finally, when on the shortlist tab, again, same steps as the previous two views. However, this time, you'll want to select the FMDataLab draft shortlist view, again, not to be confused with the shortlisting view. So just before we dive into exporting, let's pause for a moment and ensure you're on track to export the right data. There's a section in the Fancy Draft tutorial called Caveats and Restrictions. If you're already familiar with the Roll Scores tool, then these are the exact same rules. But here's a quick rundown. Make sure you're using the correct views. Export using English language if you can. Other languages are handled now to a certain extent, but I can't guarantee everything is correct, so it's best to try and export using English language if you have any issues with your native language exports. Make sure to set your FM preferences to be as directed here with the number formats, and revert to the default skin if you have any issues using a custom skin, and when you've switched to the default skin, make sure to clear your in-game cache afterwards to avoid any hiccups. In terms of restrictions, there is a maximum limit of 20,000 players, which I'm not entirely sure you can actually get in Fancy Draft mode, but hopefully this shouldn't be an issue. The next step is to export the Football Manager Fancy Draft data before uploading the exported data to FMDataLab. This process is the same for all three views, so I'll just show one example. And for this example, I will use a draft that is currently in progress so I can showcase the pre-selecting player feature, and doing this within the Find Player screen. First off, just make sure that you are using the correct view. As you can see here, I'm using the FMDataLab draft search view. You will then need to click and select the first player in the list. Then to select all players in the list, press Ctrl or Command at A. Sometimes you need to go to another screen and back for this to work. Then press Ctrl or Command and P to bring up the print dialog. Then ensure web page option is selected and press OK. Then give your file a name and a location you'll be able to find easily later, and press the save button to create your exported HTML file. So now let's over to the new Fancy Draft tool within FMDataLab. You will see a new navigation option labelled Fancy Draft. Click that and you'll be brought to the Fancy Draft upload page. First thing to note here is the settings button. This button can also be found in the table view once you have uploaded your HTML file, so you can update your settings whenever you please. Clicking on the settings button will open up a dialog window with a form that allows you to configure your Fancy Draft settings within the Fancy Draft tool to align with your current draft setup. The squad budget input enables you to define your squad budget in millions. For example, entering 10 in the input here signifies a budget allocation of 10 million. This setting is to ensure that any selected shortlisted players in the Fancy Draft table stay within your allocated financial limits. If your Fancy Draft budget is unlimited, then you can check the unlimited checkbox. The club name input allows you to assign your Fancy Draft club name to pre-select any players you've already drafted in your current Fancy Draft, simplifying the shortlisting process without needing to select players you've already selected in-game. Your settings are stored within your current browser session, ensuring they persist across all Fancy Draft uploads. This allows you to conveniently adjust and refine them as needed without starting from scratch. However, it is important to note as a limitation, these settings are not synchronized across different browsers or devices. So with the settings out of the way, let's upload that exported HTML file. You can do so by clicking the Fancy Draft upload button. This will open up your file explorer so you can navigate to wherever you've saved your exported HTML file and select it. Once uploaded, if this is your first time using FMDataLab, you'll be brought to the role selection screen. Otherwise, you'll be brought directly to the Fancy Draft table view. The role selection screen is the same as the Roll Scores role selection screen. Here you can select which roles you want to appear in the Fancy Draft table to preview players' roll scores for the selected roles. You will then be presented with a comprehensive table view, closely resembling that of the Roll Scores tool. However, this interface incorporates several additional features specifically tailored for the Fancy Draft mode. One notable enhancement is the ability to select prospective players for your draft. Within the table view, direct your attention to the name column. In each row, alongside the player's name, you will find a checkbox. Toggling this checkbox enables or disables the selection of that player for your draft. You will see that since I've exported my player list in the middle of a draft and I set my club name in the settings, that the players I've already selected in FM are now selected within the table. As players are selected or deselected, your prospective squad size is dynamically updated. The squad size section provides a summary of the players currently selected for your draft. This overview includes all players selected in the table, giving you a snapshot of your squad composition. Hovering over any of these selected players' icons will reveal a small player profile snapshot, including their name, transfer value, and their best role. This best role is determined from a role in which they can play, where the percentage difference between their role score and that of the highest scoring player in the same role in FM is the smallest, as established using the top role scores dataset, which I covered in my previous video. Now, this is the same role that is found for that player within the best position role rank column found in the table view. If you require more granular details, clicking on any player's name will open up the player details panel. Selecting a player also updates the squad budget section. The squad budget offers an insightful overview of your allocated budget as defined within your fancy draft settings, providing a real-time display of both the budget spent and the funds remaining based on your current player selections. This allows you to make more strategic and financially informed decisions throughout the drafting process. Within the fancy draft table view, you will find a show draft info button. Clicking this button will display the draft info view. Initially, you'll be brought to the info section. You can change to the other section, current squad, by clicking the current squad tab. The info section delivers a comprehensive breakdown of key aspects of your current draft selection, offering an insight into critical areas. Here you'll also find that same squad budget section, though it does differ slightly from the same section in the table view, as it will display the average price of your current selected players. The squad size section is also available here. It differs slightly again from the same section in the table view, as in if you have any players remaining in your squad selection and you have any budget available, this section will display the average price required for each of the remaining players to ensure your selections remain within the allocated budget. This figure offers a crucial reference point, allowing you to balance financial constraints with strategic player choices. So in this view, you will also find the selected positions section, which contains a pitch graphic, which is modeled closely to the one similar within FM's fancy draft mode, illustrating the count of players selected for each position. Also within the draft info view, you have the current squad section that you can view by clicking the current squad tab. The current squad section provides a comprehensive overview of all players currently selected for your draft. This section is organised by players' primary positions, with each player showcasing a card, resembling the attribute cards view within the fancy draft mode. Each player card displays the player's name, which can be clicked on to open up the player details panel. The card also reveals all positions in which a player can play, visualised in a miniature pitch view for swift reference. Positions that a player can naturally play will be highlighted with a dark green circle. Position deemed to be a player's best position as determined from the best position column in your uploaded HTML file, and in-game this is labelled as the assistant manager's opinion of the player's best position. Now this best position will be highlighted with a light green circle in the pitch graphic. This view highlights each player's best role, again similar to the squad size tooltip. This is the same role that is found within the best position role rank column found in the table view. The role attributes section provides a list of weighted attributes relevant to the player's best role. By default, the role attributes are sorted in descending order based on their attribute value. However, if you want to prioritise attributes according to their significance within the player's best role, you have the option to sort by attribute weight instead. To switch between the sorting options, simply click on the sorting icon, which enables you to toggle seamlessly between sorting by attribute value or attribute weight. By highlighting these weighted attributes, it offers an at-a-glance evaluation of the player's skill set, allowing you to make an informed understanding of how effectively they fulfill the requirements of their best role. You also retain the flexibility to remove any players from your selection if, after reviewing their details, you decide they may not be the best fit for your fancy draft. So, with your draft all set up on FMDataLab, you're now armed with the tools to make more informed decisions during your fancy draft. So if someone swoops in and nabs one of your top picks, for example, you can quickly pivot and find an alternative for your next selection. So no need to panic scroll through the player pool, just stay calm and let the data do the heavy lifting. So that's the new fancy draft tool covered. If any fancy draft veterans out there have any suggestions for features I can add here, do let me know, as I've never actually played fancy draft, so I'm not sure of all the ins and outs of what I should be looking for here. So there's perhaps some obvious features I'm missing out on, but so do let me know. Now, on top of the addition of the fancy draft tool, I have also made some column filter changes across all tables on FMDataLab. The first of which is the position column. Now, all position columns across the roll scores, Moneyball, fancy draft tools, and also the top roll scores dataset tables have undergone some refinement, introducing a more flexible filtering system. One of the most notable improvements is the ability to determine whether you wish to filter players who can perform in any or all of the selected positions. Previously, you could only filter players who could play any of the selected positions. This update is more beneficial when seeking players who fulfill a specific positional profile, something that was unattainable with the previous filtering system. Clicking on the position drop-down menu within the header will now open a dialog window where you can select multiple positions from a pitch graphic, similar to Football Manager's position select in search filters. Within the dialog window, you will find two tabs under the condition operator label. These tabs govern the logic behind the position filtering process, enabling you to specify whether the player search results should include players who can play in any or all of the selected positions. First up, you'll find the default OR tab. The OR tab, when selected, determines that the filter results will include players capable of playing in any of the selected positions, allowing you to identify players who can play in any of the selected positions and not exclusively all of them. So for example, if you selected right attacking midfielder and centre midfielder, then click Save to save your filter, then the filter results will return all players who are eligible to play as either a right attacking midfielder or a centre midfielder, basically how the old filtering system worked. Next we have the AND tab. The AND tab, when selected, determines that the filter results will include players capable of playing in all of the selected positions. This option is ideal for scenarios where you require a certain profile of a player that fits across multiple selected positions. For example, if you select left back and a defensive midfielder, the filter results will return all players who are eligible to play as both a left back and a defensive midfielder. However, this would not return any players or say just defensive midfielders, as they can't play as left back, unlike the OR operator. So if you wish to reset or clear the position filter, you can click on the reset button and click the save button to do so. The other filter change is applied to the transfer value, wage and asking price columns. On the column headers, you will find two inputs that enable you to filter on players' min and max values. Each input now allows you to select a unit multiplier to apply to the enter number in the input. For instance, if you are looking to find players with a maximum transfer value of 10 million, you no longer need to manually enter the 10 million figure. Instead, you can simply input 10 into the max input and select the M or million unit from the drop-down. So that's, instead of having the 8 keystrokes of entering 10 million, you can just enter 10 and just select the M unit from the drop-down. The other two units found in the unit drop-down are the hyphen option, which is essentially just a raw value in the input, so no multipliers applied to the input value. Basically how the input worked previously. So this would now just be 10. And the other option is K, which is a 1000 multiplier, so this would then interpret the filter to be 10,000. By default, the million unit will be selected for both transfer value and asking price columns, but for the wedge column, the default will be the 1000 unit. So that's it for the most recent FMDataLab updates. I hope those of you who play Fantasy Draft Mode find the new tool to be useful. Now do let me know if you have any issues or any suggestions for additional features. So that's all for me. Bye for now.